reality is all around us. At every moment of every day, we make choices. We are constantly thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing. Or possibly we are making the choice to not think, to not say, to not do anything. Every choice we make is either morally good, morally neutral, or morally evil. And therefore everything we do either makes us more or less virtuous. There is thus no way around confronting these moral issues. Ethics is a field of philosophy that deals with questions of how to determine right from wrong. Metaethics is a subfield of ethics that deals with the fundamental questions of ethics, that is, those questions that define, and the answers to which are presupposed by, all ethical discourse. Such questions include: how do you define goodness? How do you define evil? Is morality objective or subjective? If morality is objective, what is the source of these objective moral standards? How does the human mind discern good from evil? What is the source of man's moral sentiments? In this video, we will discuss metaethics from a Catholic perspective. More specifically, we will deal with the issue of how the Catholic Church has traditionally defined the concept of goodness and the concept of evil, and how these things relate to God. In Catholic moral thought, the nature or definition of goodness is simultaneously the most elusive and yet the most self-evident part of human existence. There was an Irish-born American priest named Father James Fox, who was particularly active in the early 20th century. He was born and raised in Ireland, but he later migrated to the United States, where he eventually obtained a teaching position at the Catholic University of America. And he actually wrote an entry for the Catholic Encyclopedia, which was one of the most exhaustive encyclopedias of Catholic theology and history. And in his entry on the nature of goodness for the Catholic Encyclopedia, he wrote, quote, "Good is one of those ideas which cannot be strictly defined," unquote. What that means is not that goodness is subjective, but rather, goodness is such a multi-layered idea that one should be wary of simplistic or overly broad definitions. This can be seen in the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas wrote in the Summa Theologiae, Prima Pars, Question 5, Article 1, quote, "I answer that goodness and being are really the same, and differ only in idea, which is clear from the following argument. The essence of goodness consists in this, that it is in some way desirable. Hence Aristotle says, goodness is what all desire. Now it is clear that a thing is desirable only insofar as it is perfect, but everything is perfect so far as it is actual. Therefore, it is clear that a thing is perfect so far as it exists, for it is existence that makes all things actual, as is clear from the foregoing. Hence, it is clear that goodness and being are the same reality," unquote. Aquinas here borrows from Aristotle's definition of goodness. The good is that which is desirable. Yet Aquinas notes that a thing is desirable only insofar as it has some perfection, and a thing has some perfection only insofar as its being is actualized to some degree. Now all of this requires an understanding of two metaphysical concepts, potentiality and actuality. Potentiality refers to the power to do something, the ability or the possibility of something acting or something being a certain way. Actuality refers to the realization of a particular potentiality. When a thing lacks existence, it exists as pure potentiality. That is to say, the idea of a thing exists, but that's all. Let's take the example of a car. Until the moment I choose to make a car, it is something that could exist, but doesn't actually exist. It exists as pure potentiality. When one looks at an individual car at each stage of the process of production, the potentiality associated with that car is actualized to various degrees. Thus, a thing can only be desirable insofar as it has certain perfections, and a thing can only have certain perfections insofar as it exists and thus has been actualized to some degree. St. Thomas elsewhere defines being or existence, considered as such, to be the first good, since it is what makes possible all other goods. All of the perfections which come forth from being, in some sense, perfect being. Because of this, Aquinas sees being and goodness as the same concept, examined from different perspectives. Goodness is thus a function of being. Thus, while Aquinas sees the definition of goodness as that which is desirable, he also sees goodness as something much broader, for goodness is connected with the most basic principles of our existence. It is for this reason that the Catholic tradition sees goodness as simultaneously both one of the most elusive realities and yet one of the most intuitive. Goodness is something that permeates every part of our being. To be good, at least in part, presupposes that we exist, and that we exist in a certain way, and that our actions conform to the fundamental realities of our existence. Aquinas, and most of the Catholic tradition before and after him, accepts the notion that everything has an essence, and to be good means to act in accordance with that essence. Think about it. When we say, that's a good cat, or that's a good computer, or that's a good manager, what we mean is that that thing is doing all the stuff that it is supposed to do, all the stuff unique to its essence, and does it well. With this in mind, it will be easy to understand the Catholic definition of evil. One school of thought within Christianity is known as the divine commands theory, which states that something is good insofar as God commands it, and something is bad insofar as God prohibits it. And to a great extent, this can be justified by various teachings from the Bible and from the Church Fathers. For example, in Book 23 of his work Against Faustus the Manichaean, St. Augustine writes, and I quote, "Sin, then, is any transgression in deed, word, or desire of the eternal law," unquote. So, moral evil, sin, basically refers to anything whereby we violate the law of God. Yet, like with goodness, the concept of evil is situated within a broader metaphysical framework. In On the Nature of Good, Chapter 3, St. Augustine writes, quote, "For we Catholic Christians worship God, from whom are all goods, whether great or small, and from whom is every limit, whether great or small, and from whom is every order, whether great or small," unquote. Immediately after this, St. Augustine writes, quote, "For certainly the more things possess of limit, form, and order, the better they are. But the less things possess of limit, form, and order, the less good they are," unquote. So what St. Augustine is saying is that everything that exists has a particular order or structure to its being. A being that lacks any form or order or structure really has no perfections. For such a thing, that is, a thing that lacks any form, order, or structure, if it were to exist, could be something, or even anything, but it isn't anything. Yet the more a thing has a form, the more a thing has a specific structure or order to its being, the more its being is capable of supporting or embodying certain perfections, and therefore the better it is. In his work on free will, St. Augustine unpacks the ethical implications of this larger metaphysical worldview, saying, and I quote, "Perhaps you will ask, since the will moves when it turns from the unchangeable to the changeable good, how this movement arises. The movement is certainly evil, though free will must be counted as a good, since without it we cannot live rightly. The movement, this turning away from the Lord God, is undoubtedly a sin, but certainly we cannot call God the author of sin. This movement cannot therefore come from God. What then is its source? When you ask this question, if I answer that I do not know, you will perhaps be disappointed, but yet I will be speaking truly. For that which is nothing cannot be known. Only keep firm your sense of reverence towards God, so that no good may occur either to your senses, your intelligence, or your thoughts in any way which you do not acknowledge to be from God. Nothing of any kind is to be found which does not come from God. Recognize God at once as the author of everything in which you see measure, number, and order. If you take these away, nothing whatsoever will be left. You may say that there remains some incipient form, where you find neither measure, nor number, nor order. But since when these are present, the form is perfect, you must not speak even of an incipient form. It seems to stand only as material to be perfected by the artist. But if the perfection of the form is good, the beginning of the form must already be a good. When all good is taken away, there will remain not even a trace, absolutely nothing. All good is from God. Therefore, there is no kind of good which is not from God. Hence the movement of turning away, which we agreed to be sin, is a defective movement, and the defect comes from nothing." Unquote. Now I know that was kind of a lengthy quote, so let's sort of unpack it here. In a word, St. Augustine says that sin can be defined as a turning away from God and a turning towards created things. It's not that created things are bad, but rather the purpose or the objective of human life is union with God. A thing's being is defined by the end or the purpose towards which it is oriented. If a thing fails to orient itself towards its proper end, then it fails to be all that it can or should be, and therefore is not good. Therefore, to place created things above God is the definition of sin. God cannot be the cause of sin, since God creates all things, and in creating things, God imposes a specific order onto the created world, thereby causing specific things to not only exist, but to also exist in a certain way. Yet to sin is to, through a series of morally wicked choices, fail to be all that we ought to be. Therefore, Augustine concludes that evil is not a quality in and of itself. Rather, evil is the absence or corruption of some due good. Evil has no existence in and of itself. This doesn't mean that evil actions, evil words, or evil intentions don't exist. Rather, what makes them evil is the fact that some good that should be there, some good proper to a thing, is either absent or corrupted. Therefore, since God is good, and God creates all things, everything that exists is by definition good. And evil can therefore be defined as a corruption of the good. Goodness in the Catholic tradition can be seen as being metaphysically comparable to light, whereas evil is metaphysically comparable to darkness. Light, being a form of energy emerging from the production of photons, has existence in and of itself. Darkness, on the other hand, is not a thing considered in and of itself, but rather is the absence of a thing, namely light. Whereas goodness is that which perfects one's being, evil is therefore that which corrupts it. God can therefore not be considered the cause of evil, since evil has no existence in and of itself. Now, St. Augustine's words broadly parallel the words of St. Athanasius, writing almost a century earlier. St. Athanasius claims that God is the source of all being and existence, and sin is a turning away from God. Therefore, sin is a turn away from the source of all being and existence, and in a sense, a return to nothingness. The fall is therefore, in some sense, the contrary of what God does in creation. With this in mind, St. Augustine, St. Athanasius, and many of the other early teachers of the Church gave a voice to a belief which is expressed in various ways in the constant tradition of the Church. Our existences, considered in and of themselves, are inherently good. Humans are capable of doing both immense amounts of good and immense amounts of evil. This reality is sometimes expressed in both philosophy, religion, and art as humans having both a good side and an evil side. There are certain concrete elements or qualities of human nature which are good and others which are bad. This can be seen in the following examples. Sometimes, the more unpleasant or morally problematic elements of the human psyche are called the dark recesses of the human mind, or the dark recesses of the human soul. In one Native American parable, good and evil desires within man are compared to two wolves. Human nature, in such a view, is neither good nor bad considered in and of itself, since it is capable of producing both good and evil actions, good and evil words, good and evil intentions. Yet such a view is misleading if not entirely incorrect. In order for our beings to produce something good, it must be in and of itself good. That which produces good is inherently good in and of itself. What we see in each individual perfection, moral or otherwise, is the actualization of our being. The more you take away or corrupt these perfections, the more our being grows closer to returning to non-existence. Evil is therefore a corruption of what it means to be human, or what it means to be a created thing more generally. Now, in our next video, we are going to discuss how all of this relates to God. So please join us for part 2 of this video, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Thank you very much, and God bless.